দুজন স্পিকার জয়েন করে গেছে।
স্যার পুলক স্যার জয়েন করেছেন, পিনাকি স্যার জয়েন করবেন, এক্ষুনি করছেন, উনি করলেই আমরা স্টার্ট করে দেবো স্যার।
ডক্টর অভিষেক বর্মা,
বলুন।
বলুন
বলুন।
এনএসএস স্টুডেন্টকে জয়েন করতে বলেছি।
শুনতে পাচ্ছি, বলুন।
এনএসএস স্টুডেন্ট,
হ্যাঁ
জয়েন করতে বলুন।
জয়েন করবো? আচ্ছা বলছি।
নান্টুদা, পিনাকি স্যার কি জয়েন করেছেন? স্যার গুড মর্নিং স্যার।
গুড মর্নিং।
গুড মর্নিং, নমস্কার পিনাকি বাবু। নমস্কার।
হ্যাঁ গুড মর্নিং স্যার, গুড মর্নিং।
পুলক বাবু নমস্কার।
নমস্কার। নমস্কার।
আমাদের ছোট কলেজ আমরা অর্গানাইজ করছি এরকম একটা সেমিনার মৌসুমী ম্যাডামের অর্গানাইজেশনে। আপনারা এখানে এসে আমাদেরকে ধন্যবাদ আপনাদেরকে আমাদের সেমিনারে অংশগ্রহণ করার জন্য। পুলক স্যার এবং পিনাকি স্যার আমাদের ধন্যবাদ।
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার। থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
স্যার আমরা তাহলে শুরু করি।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ অবশ্যই।
Good morning everyone. I am Dr. Moushumi Mitra, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, and Organizing Secretary and Convener of today's state-level webinar on the issues of livelihoods in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. On behalf of our department, I welcome all the participants present here and hope that with all of you will cooperate with us to make this event a grand success. Today we have with us the respected principal of Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, Dr. Deboprasad Sahu, respected vice principal of Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, Dr. Binod Choudhury, the coordinator of IQAC, Dr. Shomit Kumar Maiti, and our two distinguished speakers, Dr. Pinaki Das, Associate Professor, Department of Economics, Vidyasagar University, and Dr. Pulak Mishra, Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Center of Excellence on Safety, Engineering and Analytics, Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. First, I cordially invite the respected principal of Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, Dr. Deboprasad Sahu, to deliver the welcome address. It's over to you, sir.
Am I audible? Yes, madam.
Yes, sir. Yes, you are audible.
Good morning, everybody. Myself, Dr. Deboprasad Sahu, Principal, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya. I'm the chairperson of this state-level webinar. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome all the honorable guests, resource persons, delegates, and participants of this state-level webinar on the issues of livelihoods in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. Organized by Department of Economics and IQAC Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya. Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya was established on 17th July 1964 by Dr. P.K. Sen, an eminent educationist who was promoted by the urgent necessity of the providing the young minds of the remote poor village and its adjacent areas with quality higher education. The name Seva Bharati suggested that the ideal Indian can only be constituted on the noble principle of seva or service. The word Bharati is also highly significant. One meaning of Bharati is speech, another is learning. The college is dedicated to this noble service since its establishment. And it has completed its 50 years of glorious services to the nation. The motto of the college is Tapasya, Seva, Pragati, which means the development of either the nation or the individual is a progressive concept which can be achieved through sincere contemplation and selfless service. The education can only be achieved through Tapasya or contemplation. As Swami Vivekananda says, to me the very essence of education is concentration of mind. The knowledge acquired through contemplation is not for one personal equality. Our vision is to transform our Mahavidyalaya into a center of excellence in the arena of higher education and contribute to the inclusive education of the country of generating quality human resources. The Mahavidyalaya aims the holistic development of the young learners and hopes to mold them into young citizens of the nation who are dependable, honest, and possesses a sound value system. Swami Vivekananda says education is not the amount of information that is put into your brain and runs right there. All of your life, we must have life building, man making, character making, assimilation of ideas. With this vision, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya aims at academic and education that not only people, the students of the career ladder, but also rural people, including women, and makes them independent and successful citizens. I warmly welcome Dr. Pinaki Das, Associate Professor, Department of Economics, Vidyasagar University, and Dr. Pulok Isro, Professor of Economics, Department of Humanities and Social Science, Indian Institute of Technology, Bharatpur, India, of this webinar, and convey my thanks for giving us time and sharing your knowledge with the student of our college. I am sure that the webinar is going to be a vibrant and fruitful platform for academic discussions with the participants from various colleges, universities, and institutions. Finally, I extend my genuine sense of appreciation to the members of organizing committee, technical assistants, and other members of this international webinar. Last but not the least, this webinar is for the academic development of the student community, which suffer a lot during this COVID-19 pandemic situation. I wholeheartedly welcome all the students to participate in this webinar to make it a fruitful and memorable honor. I wish a grand success of this webinar. Thank you all. Thank you, madam. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Now we will move towards our technical session. But before starting the session, let me announce that there is a slight modification of our program schedule. Both the resource persons of today's webinar will deliver the lectures first. We will conduct the interactive session at the end of both the lectures. You may put your questions in the chat box, or you may unmute yourself and raise your questions. Please give a brief introduction of yourself before writing or asking the questions. Thank you. Let us start the technical session. Our first speaker is Dr. Pinaki Das, Associate Professor, Department of Economics, Vidyasagar University. Dr. Das has 17 international publications and 34 national publications. He presented papers in 72 national or international conferences. He has also published 6 books. His areas of interests include labor economics, social protection, food security and poverty, multidimensional poverty, and women empowerment. 8 students have already been awarded PhD degree under his supervision, and presently 9 students are pursuing PhD under him. He has completed 6 research projects as the principal investigator. He is the member of Indian Economic Association, Indian Society of Labor Economics, Bengal Economic Association, and Indian Journal of Regional Sciences. Dr. Das is the alumni of Vidyasagar University and Midnapur College, and he is the gold medalist in his MA exam. He has teaching or research experience of almost 21 years, and he is the faculty of Vidyasagar University since 2010. I feel honored that such an eminent scholar like him accepted my request to deliver a talk in today's webinar. Now I cordially invite Dr. Pinaki Das, Associate Professor, Department of Economics, Vidyasagar University, to deliver a talk on the theme of today's webinar. Now it's over to you, sir.
Yes. Now I am sharing my PPT.
Yes, sir.
First off, I express my gratitude and humble regards to the organizer to give me the opportunity to share my views, my arguments regarding the issues of livelihood in the context of COVID-19. I also express my special thanks to the chairperson of this seminar, Honorable Principal of this college, Deva Prasad Sahu. I also informed from the organizing secretary and convener of the seminar, Dr. Mausumi Mitro, that it is the initiative of the principal sir. Therefore, I express my special thanks to principal sir to take such initiative, great initiative to organize national, international seminar in your college. I also express my thanks to the co-chairperson and the coordinator of the IQAC. Now I am starting my discussion. Am I clearly audible?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Clearly
Okay.
audible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. The topic of my discussion is the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on rural livelihood. Actually, we are all aware that the recent pandemic that has been created an unprecedented challenges before us across the world. But the developing countries suffered most, like India, and the areas of healthcare, livelihood, and social relationship, they are in a very vulnerable position. Therefore, the restructuring and revival of the economic growth in our country has become a serious concern of the policymakers because of this COVID-19 situation. It is recognized that to address this problem, to address the problem that we have faced due to COVID-19 pandemic, we require the strengthening of our livelihood, specifically employment opportunities and different form of livelihood, specifically for the rural masses, with the optimum and efficient utilization of the resources and skill that are available in the local level. Therefore, there is urgent need for the formation, adoption, and appropriate policies and government intervention for promoting this rural livelihood to improve the economic condition and to revival and restructuring the economic growth of our country. In this brief background, the objective of my discussion in brief is to explain how the livelihood pattern of the rural household changed over time, and specifically how the COVID-19 pandemic, this evidence, adversely affects on different forms of livelihood. These two are our major concern of discussion here. Before going to analyze the or discuss the details about livelihood, first I try to introduce the basic concepts of livelihood. That is, what do you mean by the concept of the livelihood? Because the audience are more general in nature. Some are from the outside of the economics background, some are of the students, and obviously some are the very notable scholars in this field. But what do you mean by livelihood? Actually, livelihood means means of living, which is related with the capabilities as well as assets, both tangible as well as non-tangible assets. And on the basis of the capabilities and tangible and non-tangible assets, the activities that are performed by the individual, by the households, for the means of living is treated as the livelihood. That is, different forms of economic activities, productive economic activities are the different means of livelihood. Here, the chambers and specifically Conway, they discussed a specific structure of the livelihood that is called livelihood sustainability. And this livelihood sustainability very much important in the context of COVID-19 pandemic situation. And they argued that the livelihood sustainability is a situation which help us to cope or recover from shocks or stress like COVID-19 pandemic situation, or enhance its capabilities and assets for the present as well as for the future. And within this sustainable livelihood framework, there are the three broad areas. One is the livelihood strategies, and these livelihood strategies related with the whether household or member of the household or worker can we participate in agriculture. That is called agricultural intensification, because for the rural household, the main activity is the agriculture. Therefore, the primary strategy may be the agricultural intensification, or there may be diversification of the livelihood, that is diversification from agriculture to non-agriculture, if it is available in the local area. And in other case, there is migration of the workforce. If a scope of agriculture or non-agricultural activities not available in the local region, then the person or workers try to migrate to distant place for different forms of livelihood. These are the three alternative livelihood strategies. And the livelihood framework of the household or the extent of the livelihood of the household mainly depend on the five form of the capital or asset structure that the household have experienced. Uh, these five forms of capital and assets are human capital, physical capital, social capital, financial capital, and natural capital, that is natural resources. Human capital related with the skills of the worker, the education level of the worker, the age of the worker, gender also, as well as health condition. All these parameters are related to the human capital. And if a person have endowed with better human capital, then he or she is able to participate in more remunerative job. Similarly, there is the physical capital. Physical capital means different form of infrastructure that helps the household to participate in different form of livelihood, which are includes transport, energy, that is electricity, communication, market facilities, and different type of productive assets which are directly used for the production purposes. Therefore, the physical capital, availability of the physical capital are very effective or play very important role for the livelihood strategy. Similarly, on the other hand, the efficiency of the physical capital also leads to the situation that are not favorable for the household. There is also social capital. Social capital means social resources. Social resources means the government benefits, social networks, membership of groups. Membership of group means different form membership to getting different form of government benefits, different form of social protection benefits. Cooperative, village panchayat, political association, the membership of this organization or institution is also related to social capitals, and these types of social resources also helps the household to frame her livelihood. There is also financial capital. Financial capital includes financial resources, that is the availability of the credit, microfinance, savings, and remittances that sent by the migrant worker to the household members. And finally, the natural resources. Natural resources means the stock of the resources like common property resources, specifically land, forest, water, wildlife, etc. Therefore, these are the capital structure or capital assets that play a very crucial role to frame the livelihood strategy of the households. Here now I consider the detailed livelihood framework in relation to the vulnerability context. Obviously, this vulnerability arises due to the present situation, present shocks, that is called COVID-19 pandemic shocks. Actually, the factors that affecting people participation in different forms of livelihood is strongly related to whether or not the people have access to these five forms of the capital assets that I have discussed earlier. That is natural resources, physical capital, human capital, social capital, and financial capital. This livelihood asset influence and determine the access to the socio-economic structure of the society at large and their formal and informal institution, government, market, culture, laws. These are all helps to frame the livelihood strategy of the household. Therefore, the capital assets, these five forms of the capital assets, in combination with the structure of the economy, that is the role of the private sector and the public sector, along with different role of the institutions, determine the available set of livelihood strategy and the achievement of the certain outcomes of this livelihood strategy. Both these outcomes and societal structure and institution can have positive or negative impacts on the livelihood, and hence there are different forms of the loops. suppose if I consider the vulnerability context due to the COVID-19 pandemic, then that obviously adversely affect the capital structure of the household, all sorts of the capital structure of the households. And the household realize a crisis of the livelihood asset or capital structure. That crisis of the livelihood asset or capital structure leads to the low productive livelihood strategy. And this low productive livelihood strategy gives the outcomes like low income, food insecurity, poor health condition, multidimensional poverty, that is different forms of poverty and deprivation, and also lack of asset formation. And this lack of asset formation again degenerate the livelihood base of the households and increase the livelihood crisis of the households. But side by side, there is a role of the economy, that is structure of the economy, public sector and the private sector. That is the role of the government, as well as different institutions, market, culture, laws, etc., etc. That is government supports and non-government supports, which are related with the structure of the economy as well as institution. They have some favorable impact on the access of this physical capital, access of this, livelihood capital structure. That is, if suppose, for particular example, if government extended social protection benefit, then it directly increase the social capital. Similarly, the government support or support from non-government organization influence favorably on the livelihood asset structure. That is, households are more able to better access of this livelihood asset structure, and if this is possible, then this better access of the livelihood asset structure leads the household for the highly productive livelihood strategy. And this highly productive or better productive livelihood strategy may help the household to increase his income, to overcome the food insecurity, to increase the poor health condition, and to overcome different forms of multidimensional poverty and deprivation. And side by side, it also helps to increase the asset formation. That is, it adds something on the livelihood capital asset structure or asset base that has a sustainable or long-term impact of the household, of the livelihood of the household. This is the theoretical background, obviously, but what happened in the reality, that is the very big questions. From the theoretical background, we have considered both negative forces as well as positive forces. But what is the actual situation in the reality? Actually, we are all aware that the COVID-19 pandemic creates the unprecedented effect on livelihood capital structure. And we are also aware that there is a crisis of the livelihood capital assets. On the other hand, I have explained that the role of the government that have some favorable impact on the livelihood capital structure. Okay. But in reality, what happened can be discussed on the basis of some empirical evidences. But the point is that there is a lack of information to understand the impact of COVID-19 on rural livelihood. There is no evidence of rigorous analysis of the rural household from the government end for the appropriate policy measures. But there are a few survey-based analyses are available that carried out by individual researcher. But here I also mentioned a particular point that recently the Ministry of Science and Technology, Government of India, have taken an initiative to frame the policy framework to develop the livelihood of the rural household. And me, along with Professor Pulak Mishra, leading by Professor Ghosh, we will submit a research proposal. I think Professor Pulak Mishra will go details about these issues. I do not go details about that, but now I present some evidences that help us to understand the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the livelihood of the households. Here I will presenting three evidences, two from the earlier researcher and third one from my side. Okay. This is the evidence one. Actually, this is a survey-based outcome that is made by Gupta et al., which is recently published in the very eminent journal in our discipline, World Development, by Science Direct. Actually, they are drawing an intensive qualitative inquiry in 8 villages of Himachal Pradesh in India. And they carried out this survey in between May, June, July of 2020. And they found that the livelihood security, specifically farm-based livelihood security, what is the impact of the immediate impact of the COVID-19 lockdown or COVID-19 pandemic situation? The immediate impact that they have observed are listed here. I have listed here the immediate impact that they have observed. Low harvest income resulting from restricted market access, high transportation costs to market due to restricted transport, and crop wasted because of lack of market access, lack of access to agriculture inputs due to inability to get to shops, lack of access to livestock feed due to disrupted fodder transport. There are some response from household level as well as community level. Specifically here I mention the response from the institutional level, that is from the government sides. They observed that Kisan Rath mobile application to connect buyers with the farmers to sell their product, and advance release of the installment of the Prime Minister Kisan Samman scheme, free refills of cooking gas under Ujjwala scheme, and 3-month advance payment of social services allowances like senior citizen, widow pension, disability pension, etc., etc., and they are delivered at their home. These are the issues related with the livelihood, farm-based livelihood. If you consider the non-farm-based livelihood, then what are the impact that they observed? There is the loss of jobs of wage laborers, loss of income in dairy sales, and there is also some response made by household and community level as well as from the government sides. From the government side, government increased the daily wage amount and scope of work under MG Nereka only. And finally, the situation of the food access and security, how the pandemic situation and these types of livelihood affects the food access and food security situation of the household. There is the exhausting food stocks during the harvest season, uncertainty of cash income to buy food, concern of infection from fresh fruit and vegetables in the market. That is the major concern that we are with the people we are facing during that time. And side by side, there is also some institutional level response, that is response from the government side, extra food ration beyond the actual entitlement of the household, that is actual allotment of the household under the public distribution system, and distribution of the midday meal ration to the families at school are not functioning. Therefore, midday meal ration, they are also distributed to the families, and also home delivery of the rations under ICDS as well as to the pregnant and lactating mothers under the Poshan Ahar scheme, and the distribution of food kits specifically to the reverse migrant workers, Therefore, they argued that the PDS in our country provided a policy structure that could be quickly mobilized for the present crisis. Actually, the PDS program helps the household to restore their food access, to restore their food security level. Okay, now I present another evidence. That is also the survey-based study. It is made by Lindsay and her team. It is also published in Food Security by Springer Nature. Actually, they have conducted phone interviews which is spreading 12 states and 200 districts in India during 3 to 15th May 2020, and they surveyed 1,437 farmers. Okay, what are their findings? Now let us see. About 1/10 of the farmers did not harvest in the past month, with primary reason due to unfavorable weather, cited by 37% farmer, and due to lockdown by 24% farmer. A total of 63% farmers harvested in the past month, but only 44% had sold their crops, and remaining they are not able to sell their crops, and 12 were still trying to sell their crop, and 39% stored their crop, with more than half reporting lockdown related issues as the reason for storing. Whereas 79% of the household with wage workers witnessed a decline in the wages in the past month, and 49% of the household with income from livestock also witnessed a decline. Side by side, the landless farmers were about 10 times more likely to skip a meal as compared to large farmers, but the majority reported receiving extra food rations from the government. Nearly all farmers reported consuming staple grains daily. In the past week, 63% consumed dairy product daily, 40% only able to consume vegetables daily, and 26% are able to consume any types of pulses, and only 7% able to consume fruits. That is, there is a dietary diversification due to COVID-19 pandemic. So these values are much lower than the reported previously for the farmers in India before the COVID-19 situation. Therefore, in conclusion, we can say that the COVID-19 lockdown in India has primarily impacted farmers' ability to sell their crops and livestock products, and decreased their daily wages and diversify their consumption pattern. Now I come to the third evidence. Actually, this is the field survey evidence that is made by me along with my team of research scholars. Actually, it is a longitudinal survey. Here we consider a field survey under 4 years interval. First was 2012-13, second was 2016-17, and finally it was going on in 2021. In 4 years interval, we have surveyed 600 households from 24 villages in 4 relatively backward districts: Paschim Medinipur, Jhargram, Bankura, and Purulia. It helps us to explore the changes in the livelihood sources and what is the adverse impact of the COVID-19 situation to sustain the livelihood. Because here we are able to compare the present livelihood situation along with the past livelihood situation. And the present survey is during the COVID-19 situation. Therefore, it also helps us the adversity that generated by the COVID-19 pandemic situation. But I do not go details about this result. I only presenting here some summary findings. First of all, I consider the asset structure of the households. Asset structure of the household. When you consider the asset structure of the household, first one is the land. Land is a very important asset for the rural households. Here I present in the first diagram. It is a per capita gross cultivable land. That means per capita total cultivable land of the household. Here we can see that nearly 31.5%, that is 1/3 of the household, they are landless. 0 is their cultivable land, that is their land lease. And the other household having also relatively low per capita land holding. Among the 600 sample household, only 10% household having per capita land is more than 20 decimal. Only 10% household having per capita land 20 decimal. 20 decimal is also a minimum, is not sufficient amount, but amount that may be secure the livelihood of a particular person. Therefore, all other households are marginal or landless household. That is, land they are deficient with the land assets. Side by side, if you consider other types of assets, productive asset or non-productive asset, we have documented all. Most of the assets are non-productive in nature. Only pump set, sprayer, or some means of transport like cow cart and rickshaws, or even bicycle, they are some sorts of productive asset, but other are very non-productive type of asset. Therefore, their asset structure is also deficient. If you consider their knowledge and skill, which are related to the human capital, here you see that the average years of education of the worker, the average years of education of the worker is also relatively low. The education level of the sample household that is depicted in this particular figure, here it is observed that the average years of schooling of the workers has increased over time. That is true. But the share of workers with average years of schooling 6 years or less is 72%. And hardly any worker found who have formal technical training or professional education, but in respect of the skill, some workers have expertise to do the specific activity, and some of them acquire their skill hereditary. Therefore, as a result, if you consider the labor power, that is another capital of the household, then we can see that there are 3 types of labor. We are aware that one is casual labor, that is daily worker, and another is the regular employed, that is employment on a regular basis, permanent worker, and self-employed, that is who are employed in the self-activity, that is farming activity or other non-farming type of activities, who are called self-employed. But among these 3 types of employment, here we noticed that the casual labor is the majority. Nearly 61% of total workers are casual in nature. Only 11% are regular employed and 28% are self-employed. That most of the workers are casual in nature, and over time the casualty also increases. Here in 2012-13 it is 52%, whereas in 2016-17 it was 65%, but in the recent time it was 61%. That is, most of the workers are casual labor in nature. But due to COVID-19 lockdown and COVID-19 pandemic, the availability of the job for this casual labor are limited. Therefore, they are facing crisis of income by selling their labor power. There is another form of asset that is called social capital. Social capital means membership of different social protection programs. Here we have documented different types of social protection programs. The list is not exhaustive, but here you consider the important social protection programs, that is government programs, and they are classified under 5 groups: food-related program, health benefit-related program, education benefit-related program, housing benefit-related program, and social security-related program. Food-related program mainly comes from the PDS system. There are different forms of PDS scheme, and accordingly different types of benefit. But we can see that most of the household during the period of pandemic, the green bar indicates the membership of the household during the pandemic situation during 2021, and the red one is the 2016-17, and the blue one are the 12 and 13. Therefore, the membership of the different social protection programs significantly increased during the pandemic period, during 2021 compared to the earlier period. Specifically in case of a food-related program, in case of ICDS and midday meal, which are also gives the food ration during this lockdown, and different forms of pension scheme, old age pension as well as Kunnasri scheme for educated girls. This increase of membership from different social protection programs helps the household to get the more benefit from the social protection program. That helps the household to increase their livelihood outcome, favorable livelihood outcome. They are deficient their own entitlement in respect of land, in respect of their skill or knowledge, in respect of other assets, as well as in respect of the types of the labor. But they are side by side, they are endowed with different forms of government benefits, specifically during the COVID-19 lockdown situation. And this is the summary table of the distribution of the income of the household. Actually, income is the immediate outcome of the livelihood. Immediate outcome of the livelihood. And I have classified the household according to the different sources of their income. Here the sources of income are classified as agricultural income, labor income, that is only selling by labor power. Agricultural income from the agricultural production, other than agricultural income, that is non-farm types of activities, non-farm production types of activities, trade income, that income from any types of trade activities, asset incomes, and common property resource, income from common property resource, and finally, that is income from forest resource, income from river, etc., etc. And social protection benefit, that is benefits obtained from the government under different social protection scheme. If you consider that the situation in 2012 and 13, 48% of total income of the households came from the labor sources, labor income, and 22% from the social protection benefit. The situation in case of 2016 and 17, for the labor income, it increased from 48 to 70%. In case of social protection benefit, it increased from 22 to 15%. That is, labor income, that is the own entitlement of the household, own source of livelihood household, increased over time during 2012-13 to 16-17. That is during the normal situation. But during the abnormal situation, in the context of vulnerability, there is a limited scope of the employment and jobs. Therefore, the labor income is also limited of the household, and the share of the labor income decreased from 70% to 38%. The share of agricultural income is also relatively low, 4%. Other share of income is also relatively low. But if we notice here that the social protection benefit, that is income share from different government programs, is around 40%. That is 50% of total income of the rural household came from social protection benefits, different form of social protection benefit during this COVID-19 situation. This is the absolute value of the income from different sources of the livelihood in absolute term. Actually, it is in the current price. Obviously, we have also analyzed the income from the constant price, but current price help us to understand the actual income of the household. If you consider the average income across different sources of livelihood, then the average income from the labor income from labor source increased from rupees 341 to 1,101 in 2016-17, but it significantly decreased 443 in 2020 and 21. That is labor income more than half, decreased more than 50% during 2006-7 to 2020-21. There is also the evidence of the decline of the agricultural income, other than agricultural income, trade income, asset income, as well as common property resource income. because there is a restriction of the movement of the household or the member of the household due to COVID-19 pandemic situation. There is only the evidence of the increase of the income from social protection benefit. It was previously 154 per capita per month, which increased to 237, and in the last year, latest year, 2021, it increased to 500, rupees 561. That is social protection benefit is the only the means of livelihood that helps the household to survive during this COVID-19 situation. But this excessive dependence on the social protection benefit for the livelihood is raised the questions of livelihood sustainability in the future, in the long run, because their own livelihood are deficient in respect of the labor, agriculture, other than agricultural production, trade, asset, as well as common property resources. Therefore, there is the great concern of the livelihood sustainability of the rural masses. Only government support, the short-term government support helps the household to maintain their minimum level of living. But there is the big question of the livelihood sustainability in the future. And at last, I consider some concluding observation. The details will discuss by my next speaker, Professor Pulok Mishra, the policy aspects of the livelihood in the context of COVID-19 situation. During the constant of the time, I just conclude my observation. They need to improve the social and economic infrastructure. Without the better infrastructure, either social and economic infrastructure, we are not able to develop the livelihood of the household, own livelihood of the household. There is also needs for financial assistance, skill training, promote commercial and industrial center in rural areas for better marketing accessibility, marketing facilities. And credit and input subsidy is also important to establish different types of micro enterprises in the rural region. There is the needs for awareness of the entrepreneurship development, comprehensive marketing assistance, and also the cluster development approach is also important to overcome this crisis situation. Integration of micro enterprises, that is small enterprises, household industries, cottage industries, into the general policy for economic development is important to restore the livelihood structure or livelihood of the household. There is no alternative other than to increase the micro enterprises at the rural level, at the village level, at the household level. And this micro enterprise, the development of this micro enterprise or the promotion policy of the micro enterprise must be linked with our general policy, our aggregate policy of the economic development. Otherwise, there is no alternative to survive or restore the rural livelihoods. Thanks all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Sir has nicely explained the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on rural livelihood. He showed how different forms of capital assets of households influenced the livelihood strategies of rural households. He also presented some case studies which shows that the pandemic situation, how the pandemic situation affected the food access and security system, the livelihoods, employment condition, and thereby income level of the rural economy. We have a few questions in our chat box, but first let us start the second lecture, then we will put those questions to our speakers. Our second speaker in today's session is Dr. Pulak Mishra, Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Center of Excellence on Safety Engineering and Analytics, IIT Kharagpur. Dr. Mishra has published more than 50 articles in various reputed national and international journals. He has published 9 papers in different edited books. Dr. Mishra has completed 21 research projects sponsored by various government organizations of India as well as abroad as principal investigator or co-principal investigator. At present, 13 projects are ongoing under his supervision. He has provided consultancy on various projects of NABARD as well. Dr. Mishra's areas of interests include industrial economics, public economics and policy, and economics of rural development. 5 students have been already awarded PhD under his supervision. 17 are pursuing PhD under his guidance at present. Dr. Mishra is the alumni of Vidyasagar University and stood first in both his BSc and MSc examinations. He has teaching or research experience of almost 22 years and he is the faculty of IIT KGP since 2011. It is my privilege that such an eminent economist like him is agreed to deliver a talk in today's webinar. Now I cordially invite Dr. Pulak Mishra, Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Center of Excellence on Safety Engineering and Analytics, IIT Kharagpur, to deliver his talk on today's theme. Now it's over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude and sincere thanks for organizing webinar on such an important topic and also giving me an opportunity to speak here. Dr. Das has given a very nice perspective of livelihood-related issues relating to different spheres of economy, and also he has talked about the various forms of capitals that can play very important role in promoting livelihood opportunities and also making them sustainable in the long run. He has also provided empirical evidences at different levels, particularly during the COVID situation, how livelihood scenario has changed, how the composition has changed. Basically, he has emphasized on more reliance on social capital, and then how people have become more, actually people are having more access to social assistance programs, and maybe they have become more dependent on such programs. So empirically, theoretically, he has provided an excellent perspective which will basically benefit and give the right link to the discussion that I am going to carry forward. And in fact, he has made my task easier because I don't now need to repeat the perspective of what has happened because of COVID outbreaks. Rather, I can straightaway go for some perspectives as well as some issues relating to promotion of livelihoods, which would be inclusive as well as sustainable in the long run, particularly after the COVID outbreaks. So with this background, I will now share my presentation. Is the file visible?
No.
No, sir.
No, sir. No, sir. File is not visible.
So should I make it window or enter screen?
Entire screen.
Okay.
You will share entire screen.
Is it visible now?
Not at all.
Okay, just.
No, sir.
So I have opened the file and then I think I need to go for enter screen, right?
Yes.
I think it's not being visible. Do I need any permission?
No. Permission not needed. But it is PPT.
Yeah.
You downloaded it from your mail or from website if it is uploaded there.
No, it is open. I have already opened it in my desktop.
Okay. So then there is the share button in the center of the.
I have share, but that file is not being shown here.
Okay. You share the entire screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sir, first you have to click on the present now button.
Present now, okay.
Then you have to share the entire screen.
Okay. So present I'm clicking then share enter screen, but that particular file is not being shown here. Is it visible now?
Yes, now visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Maybe because of some network issue. Anyway, Dr. Das has given the perspective in the right way, which is very much interlinked with the issues that I am going to talk about. And I would be focusing more on the theoretical part, the framework which would be very, very important in promoting sustainable and inclusive livelihoods. But before I talk about that, I would just like to highlight three important issues, basically to set the context in relation to what Dr. Das talked about. One aspect is, of course, the implications of COVID-19 outbreaks and implications for livelihood opportunities, the shocks relating to livelihoods, and the various measures that have been taken in India at central level, at state level, at various local level initiatives, and their implications for the livelihood generation in larger perspective. And then the strategies for generating further livelihood opportunities. Whatever strategies have been taken so far, where are the gaps, or more probably where we can do better, and what kind of strategic supports we require to generate further livelihood opportunities. So when we talk about issues relating to livelihoods in post-COVID scenario, we basically try to look at the entire issue from these three perspectives. As I said, one is the impact of COVID-19 outbreaks on livelihoods. Then second is the measures that have been taken at different levels and their implications for overcoming the shocks and generating further livelihood opportunities. And then what else we can do to improve the situation. And let us assume that the objective is to promote livelihood opportunities that would be sustainable as well as inclusive in the long run. Now, when we talk about this, we need to understand the related perspectives. Of course, Dr. Das talked about some perspectives. One is the theoretical part relating to the 5 capitals, and the other one is basically relating to what has happened during the post-COVID scenario and how we can link the observations with the theoretical framework of sustainable livelihood assessment. But there are certain issues that may be beyond this domain of analysis. But at the same time, these issues may be very, very important to have a holistic discussion. One is the existing socioeconomic conditions of households in general and the livelihood scenario in particular. Often what we do, we talk about the livelihood at large, but we don't talk about the sectoral distribution of livelihood patterns, the composition of livelihood in respect of gender, the composition of livelihood in respect of age groups, in respect of educational status, then the nature of livelihood. To what extent they are permanent, temporal, casual. Of course, Dr. Das talked about some aspects of these in relation to four relatively backward districts of West Bengal. But then at larger perspective, we need to see these livelihood related scenarios from different issues, from different angles, in the sense that asset composition, say for example, what Dr. Das talked about, it's a very, very important aspect to look at the livelihood scenario and also to understand the future potential. But at the same time, these assets are also to be seen from the perspective of productive assets versus other household assets. So, when we talk about livelihood related implications during the post-COVID scenario, we need to see these aspects in a more holistic way, and at the same time, we need to have further detailing of the changing livelihood scenario following the COVID-19 outbreaks. Then, the resource base. Now, when I talk about resource base, I'm talking about natural resource base, I'm talking about financial resources, I'm talking about other form of resources which may be knowledge, skills, etc. But important issue here is that the right combination of existing resources or available resources, the knowledge and the skills, and how the livelihood strategies can be framed in the perspective of such interlinkages. The other important aspect is basically physical and social infrastructure. Dr. Das talked about livelihood generation in the relatively backward districts of West Bengal. An important aspect here would be to look at whether the existing physical and social infrastructure facilities are enough to facilitate generation of livelihood opportunities. When we talk about physical infrastructure, we focus on, say, roads, we focus on irrigation facilities, we focus on, say, community centers, where various training programs can be organized, and then social infrastructure in the form of education, health, then other forms of social activities, etc. So, development of access to various infrastructural facilities would also be very crucial. So, when we talk about livelihood scenario in post-COVID scenario, we need to understand to what extent we have the infrastructure facilities and to what extent we have access to those infrastructure facilities and how we can utilize those infrastructure facilities in the best possible way to promote livelihood opportunities. Then structure of different markets. And here I would be very much interested to focus on, I will be discussing on this aspect in particular in latter part of my talk, but very important angle here to look at is basically the structure of product market as well as input market. I was looking at the comment in the chat box, somebody has pointed out that the input cost in agriculture has gone up in recent years, particularly in the post-COVID scenario. Perhaps that is what the participant wanted to pointing at. But at the same time, I would say that yes, issues relating to inputs, prices of inputs, they are definitely very, very important, particularly for farming and other economic activities. But at the same time, we should also look at the output market, how the output market is structured, where we can have access, be it an individual farmer or the small scale enterprises or the micro enterprises, how they can have access, how can they enter into the market, how they can function in the market, and they can sustain the market itself. So these are very, very important issues. Now, what we do often, we look at the livelihood scenario, we analyze the livelihood potentials, but at the same time, understanding livelihood potentials and assessing its sustainability and inclusiveness in the long run also requires adequate emphasis on understanding different markets. Here, I'm talking about both input markets as well as output markets. Then the government policies, programs, and institutional supports. We have different policies already at place. At central level, we have various initiatives taken by the state governments, and also we have various institutional supports. Like Dr. Das was talking about the PDS, through which households can have access to food grains and other essential items. And in fact, this PDS has played a very, very important role during this COVID scenario in providing necessary access to essential items. But at the same time, we need to see how these policies, programs, and institutions can be integrated. Because policies, programs would be successful, effective, only when we have adequate institutional supports and the institutions that are at place are efficient enough. And then we need to also understand what are the constraints to livelihood generation and what are the opportunities in this regard. Now, what happens? There are certain empirical exercises that have attempted to understand how the livelihood scenario has changed following the COVID-19 outbreaks. But here I would like to make some points from my own understanding of these approaches. We need to have probably more systematic analysis, in the sense that we need to see how the livelihood scenario was there before the pandemic, what has happened during the pandemic. And Dr. Das talked about certain scenarios during 2020-21. But again, yes, it has provided many important insights. But at the same time, I think now we should also look at what is happening now, that is 2021-22. Because how we are overcoming the crisis, how we have faced the shocks, to what extent we could become resilient to such unexpected shocks, and how we are trying to overcome the problem. Understanding that is also very important, particularly to design appropriate strategies for generating inclusive and sustainable livelihood opportunities. Second important point is basically the level of analysis. Whether we would look at from the broader macroeconomic perspective, yes, that is very important, because that will basically set the right context for macroeconomic policies. We should also look at the state level, but what Dr. Das was pointing out, that is very important, basically, to understand the issues at local level. So micro level initiatives are also very crucial, because we have diverse socioeconomic setups, we have diverse geophysical conditions, we have diverse resource base and knowledge and skill base. So keeping all these things in mind, probably we need to have a very, very holistic analysis of how the livelihood scenario has changed following COVID outbreaks, what have been the driving factors, and how we can address the constraints to the livelihoods and what further opportunities we can explore. So once some such holistic and systematic analysis take place, probably we will have the right perspective to design the appropriate strategies. Nevertheless, from theoretical understanding, what the literature says, what the sustainable livelihood framework talks about, from those perspectives, we can think of certain issues, certain areas that would be very, very important for promoting inclusive and sustainable livelihoods. So, as I said, already there are certain initiatives. I have just highlighted a few, but there are many initiatives at different levels, be it at the central level, at state level, even there are various initiatives at local levels. But I will just highlight here some very, very important initiatives, like, say, National Infrastructure Pipeline, basically to strengthen the infrastructure facilities, what would facilitate the production process, mobility of the resources, including the workforce, mobility of output, and which will eventually accelerate the demand, because we know as student of economics that when some investment takes place, there will be multiplier effect. So it is expected that some such initiatives to strengthen the infrastructure facilities would accelerate the recovery process in the economy. Already there are some signs that we are recovering from the crisis, but it will accelerate the process further. Then there have been many initiatives to have structural reforms, particularly in the line of expanding supply. Now, when we talk about overcoming the crisis and creating further livelihood opportunities, we need to look at from demand side, as well as we need to look at from supply related aspects. And there have been many structural reforms. I will just refer to the economic survey of 2020-21, which has been published this year. I mean, one can have a look at understanding the details of what type of structural reforms have been initiated to expand the supply side of the economy. And then initiatives to facilitate growth of the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Here, three initiatives have been very, very important. One is classification of the MSMEs to bring more enterprises under the purview of MSMEs and having the related facilities which will boost their growth. And then there has been initiative to provide collateral-free term loans to these enterprises, and then removal of differences between the manufacturing and service-related MSMEs. So it is expected that these initiatives would help the MSMEs to become more competitive, to become more efficient, to access various facilities in a greater way, and in the process, they will grow at a higher rate. Then increase in capital expenditure, again, it is related to basically creating some multiplier effect in the economy and also to strengthen the production base. Then deregulation and liberalization of different sectors, again, I would refer to the economic survey, and then strengthening productive capacity and competitiveness. Here, I would like to emphasize a bit, that is, if we talk about livelihood opportunities at any level, it is very much related to how the overall economy grows. And how the overall economy would grow, there are many other factors, but two important factors are to what extent we are expanding our productive capacity and to what extent we are competitive. because it is competitiveness which would help us to expand the market opportunities, to expand the size of the economy, and in the process, there will be more livelihood opportunities generated. Now, I would like to emphasize a bit more on these two areas. One is the possible strategies, and the other one is the possible areas. Now, when I talk about possible strategies, the first one, very, very important, is to ensure rational and efficient utilization of resources available at local level. Now, often, I'm not entirely linking the discussion to this COVID scenario, but in general, often we discuss what would be the livelihood generation strategy, whether it should be resource-based, it should be resource-centric based on available resources that Dr. Das was talking about, that in many cases resources play a very, very important role to design the livelihood strategies. Yes, that is true, but whether it should be entirely resource-centric or it should also be based on knowledge, skills, and expertise driven. So basically the important issue here, how to combine what I was referring to at the beginning, how to combine the knowledge, skills, and expertise with existing resources, and how to ensure efficient utilization of resources and their rational allocation. In economics, we discuss a lot. When we talk about welfare economics, there are standard frameworks to discuss the theoretical perspective of resource allocation, how to allocate the resources optimally across alternative uses. We discuss how to distribute the output, goods and services optimally across different users. But at the same time, we also need to see this resource allocation framework in combination with available knowledge, skill, and expertise. I'll just give one example here. That is the triangle that often we talk about, that is relating to people, planet, and profit, and the trade-offs across the 3 points. Now, when we talk about people, we talk about a strategy which would be very, very inclusive. When we talk about profit, we basically talk about more income. And when we talk about planet, we basically talk about sustainability. Now, theoretically and also in practice, what can give higher income may not be necessarily sustainable in the long run. So, a particular strategy may result in higher income in the short run, but that strategy may not be very effective in the long run. I'll discuss on that a little later. Then again, a strategy which can be very, very inclusive may not necessarily give higher income. So there are trade-offs, and we need to prioritize where to emphasize. Yes, balancing is an option, but balancing these diverse forces or diverse objectives is a very, very difficult proposition. In fact, at IIT Kharagpur now we are offering a course that is AI for economics. I am also teaching a component there where we are trying to understand how AI techniques can be used to have solutions of a problem that has multiple objectives, that has multiple constraints, that has multiple stakeholders. How to have decisions in respect of resource allocation in some such scenarios, particularly when there may be conflicting interests, there may be diverse objective functions, multiple stakeholders, and then having rational and efficient allocation of resources is a very, very difficult task under some such scenarios. And we are trying to understand how AI algorithms, AI techniques can be used to resolve some such critical issues. And then, of course, balancing the resource allocation problem with existing knowledge, skills, and expertise. I'll just refer one very simple tool or concept that we use in economics, that is the production possibility frontier. Now we see, given the technology, given the resource base, along the production possibility frontier, there is a trade-off between, say, two commodities, X and Y. Now, the objective of profit maximization may give a particular solution, and this solution may be different when we have the objective of welfare maximization. The solution that we get in respect of resource allocation across alternative uses, we may often face some such trade-offs, some such conflicting objectives of profit maximization versus welfare maximization, which may eventually result in two different solutions. Now, which one to go for? And who will decide? If we leave it to the market, we have already seen the debates in allocation of critical resources, like the land. I'm not getting into the debates, the discussions, the research in this particular domain. I would just like to focus on one thing here, that having the right theoretical framework and linking with the perspective is very, very important. But again, we know in economics that it is the case that we have a trade-off. One possibility is that we enhance the resource base through which the production possibility frontier can sit outward, or we can improve the technology. So my next point here is basically to explore the scope for integration with available technologies, to expand the resource base, to find out new opportunities, and then integrate with existing support systems and institutions. Very small example. We know that the natural resource base is depleting. It is happening across the globe. And then innovation is taking place to find out alternative opportunities. Like in case of energy, we are exploring the different sources of renewable energy like solar, then wind energy, etc. So when this happens, innovation takes place, technology improves. When technology improves, we can always produce the same amount of output with less resources. And this gives us larger opportunities. When human resources become more expert, efficient, then again, the resource can be utilized. The same resources can be utilized in much better way, and in the process, the efficiency in resource utilization can be enhanced. So, a very, very important aspect of livelihood generation is to see the livelihood generation strategy in a more holistic way, from the perspective of resource utilization, integration with knowledge, skills, and expertise, and also to integrate with technologies, support systems, and institutions, so that we have more or greater resource base. We can utilize the resources in the best possible way by enhancing productivity of human resources, by having more robust production process, which can give us the same level of output with less resources, and integration with existing support systems and institutions so that we can have more outcomes, even with the same set of resources. Because there is always a conflict between profit maximization and welfare maximization, and how to utilize resources, which option to go for, which commodity combination to go for. That may be often conflicting, and we can overcome many such conflicts by looking at efficiency, technology, support systems, and institutions. Now, what are the possible areas for generating further livelihood opportunities? One such possible area would be to develop and strengthen the value chains in agriculture. Yes, it was referred in the chat box that the cost of cultivation is going up. But when cost of cultivation goes up, there are various ways to reduce the cost of production, and one such approach may be to select the right crop, to apply the right technology. Like say, we have seen in one of our projects that with some training and access to the technology, the farmers have started using the zero tillage technology. I'm not getting into the detail of the technology, but what we have seen, application of this technology has been very, very effective. Then selection of the right crop. So for example, cultivation of pulses that are less water intensive. So cultivation of pulses would benefit in two ways. One is because pulses are less water intensive, less irrigation will be required, and that will reduce the cost of irrigation. Like zero tillage farming reduces the labor cost. At the same time, because pulses require less water, the process would be more sustainable as well. And if there is further processing or value chain related activity, then farmer can get higher prices. We were having an interaction during a field work, and it was learned that if there is processing facility of pulses, the price will be double. But then we need to see that from the processor's perspective also. A particular enterprise will start processing of pulses, provided there is enough supply of pulses. So development of a cluster is very, very important. Dr. Das was talking about cluster development. And when we talk about cluster development, it may not be necessarily confined to clusters in respect of small, micro, or medium enterprises, what often we talk about, but again, it may be related to cluster of crops. So when there is a cluster of crops, even the traders are interested. And creating value chain, strengthening the value chain becomes easier. Having a robust supply chain becomes easier as compared to the farmers are cultivating many crops in a particular locality. But again, cultivation of many crops has another advantage. That is the process of crop diversification. And crop diversification gives new market opportunities. Crop diversification gives the farmers an opportunity to mitigate the risks of failures in respect of production or in markets. But then again, this is a trade-off. The farmer has a given piece of land and what to do, whether to focus on a particular crop which will give a specific scale of farming, and then in the process a cluster can be developed. Or the farmers should go for cultivating different crops. And through crop diversification, the sustainability would be ensured and the farmers can mitigate the risk and have new opportunities. The other dimension that has come up in recent years, in farming sector in particular, that is nutrition sensitive agriculture. So the issues are basically understanding the trade-offs across focusing on a few crops versus crop diversification versus food security that Dr. Das was talking about. Yes, food security is a very, very important issue. So having the right strategy at farmers level is very, very important, and this is to be linked with the support systems, basically the extension services and other form of support systems that we have. And I would say one example here. It is very interesting, in fact, and very encouraging also to see the farmers are also becoming innovative in the process. We have seen in our study area that some women farmers, they have formed some groups, some collectives, and they have started polyhouse farming. And what they are cultivating? They are cultivating early season high value cash crops. Like we have seen women farmers cultivating, say, coriander, cauliflowers, spinach in the month of July and August under the shades. And when they take these crops to the market, they get high price because these are off-season crops. So cultivating cauliflower and harvesting the same in the month of December or January, vis-a-vis cultivating the same in the month of July or August, definitely there will be difference in returns. But the question here is, what would happen if all the farmers start doing the same? Then again there will be problem of excess supply in the market and the price will go down. Because these farmers in general sell their product, the produce, at the local market. And the local market has always a limited capacity to absorb these producers, particularly the high value cash crops. So linking the farmers with supply chain and value chains would be very, very important. Dr. Das was talking about the unsold produce in agriculture. Yes, there was lack of demand because of COVID-related crisis, but at the same time, if we have enough storage facilities, if we can have enough processing facilities for many of such crops, then probably the farmer would be better positioned as compared to selling the produce directly in the market. And I just give another example from our experiments, from our survey only. In a particular place, the farmers had cultivated broccoli, a very high value cash crop. But then there was no demand in the local market. The farmers couldn't sell it. But if there was a linkage with supply chain or value chain, the farmers could have sold those produce and get the return. So having value chains and strengthening them further would be very, very important. Then emphasis on growth of industry sector. This is another very important area. We are talking about MSMEs. We are talking about various initiatives to promote the growth of MSMEs. Definitely, these are very, very important. MSMEs are labor intensive. So boosting the growth of the MSMEs definitely would generate larger livelihood opportunities. But at the same time, if we see some macro level data, over the period of time, outsourcing of manufacturing job, the extent has increased. And many of the MSMEs are now acting as the subcontractors. And obviously, the survival and growth of MSMEs would depend on how the large industries, large enterprises grow. So definitely, focus on MSMEs is very, very important. But at the same time, we also need to enhance the growth of the large enterprises. So when the large enterprises flourish, that actually gives the MSMEs the opportunities to grow. So there was a point of time when market used to be effectively segmented between the small enterprises and the large enterprises, and I feel that boundary has gone largely, and now there are larger perspective of interlinkages between the small and marginal between the MSMEs and the large enterprises, and as I say, many of the MSMEs are now acting as the subcontractors. So enhancing growth of the large enterprises and the industry sector as a whole is also very, very important. And that is also important from the perspective of strengthening the agriculture industry linkages. As students of economics, we know that how these two sectors are interdependent. So when industry sector grows, this gives the larger market for waste goods. This generates additional demand for inputs by the agro-based industries. This provides necessary technical inputs to the agriculture sector. So even for boosting growth of the agriculture sector, accelerating growth of the industry sector is also very, very important. So we need to explore the agriculture industry linkages in a greater way, and then facilitating entrepreneurship. Dr. Das has already talked about it. I'm not emphasizing much on this aspect. But one thing I would like to say here, that we have immense entrepreneurial potential. To the best of my understanding, the human resource base that we have, the skills that we have, the opportunities that we have, there is huge potential for entrepreneurship development. Probably what we need is to develop or to emphasize on necessary soft skills. We might have emphasized on technical skills, knowledge, etc. But having successful entrepreneurship also requires adequate emphasis on development of soft skills and linking with the support systems and the markets. So I would now conclude with some important notes. Yes, it is very encouraging to note that we have the signs of recovery. Economic activities are expanding, new opportunities are being created. We have, as I said, the advantage of strong entrepreneurial base and technological capabilities, along with vast pool of human resources and conducive policies and institutions. But given this, what we basically need to do, we need to focus on further development of capacities and capabilities. Like whether collective farming would give or would benefit the farmers in better way as compared to cultivating individually. Because, say for example, in case of West Bengal, a large section of the farmers are basically small and marginal farmers. The question here is whether collectivization in agriculture would create larger opportunities by enhancing their capacities and capabilities. Then resource use planning is also very, very important. How to use resources for alternative uses like land, water, etc. Even capital resources. Then we also need to emphasize on competitiveness, basically to explore external markets. And for that, having appropriate skill and scale would be very, very important. Removing imperfections in the existing markets will also be very, very important. Like whether there is market dominance, be it in input market or in output market by some players, and whether there is exploitation through monopoly power. So, removing imperfections and ensuring competition in the markets would also be very, very important. And then development of new market opportunities. Like strengthening the supply chain, strengthening the value chain, exploring the export potential would also be very important. And then facilitating information dissemination and creation of awareness. Again, these would be very important, particularly to remove the imperfections in the market and also to understand the emerging opportunities and explore those opportunities in the best possible way. And then enriching social capitals. Dr. Das talked about this. I'll just add one more point here. In some of our study areas, we have seen collective actions have played a very, very crucial role during this crisis, COVID pandemic. And social capital, one such aspect is basically promoting collective actions. So, Dr. Das talked about 5 capitals. I'll just add one point here. Having 5 capitals or focusing on 5 capitals is definitely important, but at the same time, it is also important to strengthen the interlinkages across the capitals. Whether development of human capital would promote development of social capital, or development of social capital would promote development of human capital, or development of social capital would help in better utilization of natural resources. All these are very, very important issues, critical issues that we need to understand and explore. These are inclusive and sustainable livelihood strategies. So with this, I will stop. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your fascinating lecture on the implications of various policies in livelihood generation and what kind of supports or strategies are further required to generate more livelihoods. Now we will conduct our interactive session. We have already a few questions in our chat box. And now I request my co-moderator, Mr. Nantu Pal, State Aided College Teacher, Department of Economics, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, to conduct this session.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nantu Pal, a faculty member, Department of Economics, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, as well as joint convener of this seminar. Now we start question and answer sessions. We have got some questions after discussion the topic in the chat box. The first question came from the respected Madam Dr. Shubla Mandal Saha. This question is special Dr. Pinaki sir. I am requesting Dr. Pinaki to say something about this question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Dr. Shukla Mandal Saha, for your very important and crucial questions. That is, your question is what is the optimum proportion of the government support to social and economic growth under this pandemic situation. Okay. Actually, this is the issue of the political economy. Actually, in the issue of the political economy, under the context of the different growth strategies, they are trying to optimize the government support, that is government expenditure. And these types of optimization function help us to find out the optimum government expenditure. But here I just point out one more thing is that the government support during the COVID-19 pandemic, government support whatever may be that the household faced in respect of the livelihood related issues are mainly from the social protection benefit, which is one time in nature, which is short time in nature. But these sorts of social protection benefit or government support not helps to promote long-term sustainability of the livelihood and not able to promote long-term growth in the economy. To promote the long-term growth of the economy, government must be concentrated on the infrastructure of the capital, or to develop the 5 forms of the capital. Without the development of the 5 forms of the capital, without the development of the livelihood opportunity, the sustainable livelihood of the household would not be maintained, and therefore the growth will be also limited in the future. Therefore, to promote the growth, despite the macroeconomic policy, the microeconomic policy to increase the livelihood opportunity, that is to increase the different form of capital assets, and as well as their interlinkage, as argued by the Professor Mishra rightly, these are very, very important. Thank you, Madam, for your nice questions. Perhaps another question from Nantu Pal. Okay, yes. This question has been also answered by Professor Mishra. That is during the COVID-19 pandemic, there is the evidence of the increase of the input price of the agriculture. That increase of the increased price of the agriculture also leads to the lower level of net income of agriculture of the farmers. That is the serious concern. But the alternative, what is the alternative way? That is that maybe comes from the government end. That the government also imposes higher taxes on agricultural inputs. That may be the one reason to increase the price of the product, as well as the market is imperfect during this COVID-19 situation. There is the less scope of the mobility of the agricultural input. That may be another reason for the high rise of the agricultural inputs. But it is our serious concern that the farmers, the agriculture, who save us during this pandemic period. Therefore, we take special attention to the agriculture sector in general and to the farmers in particular to maintain their sustainable livelihood. Thank you. There is another question. Perhaps I request Professor Mishra to address the question given by Sujata Vera.
Yes, thank you. The question is basically, why do the institutional initiatives fail to achieve the target of growth during the pandemic? To my understanding, this pandemic was unexpected, and probably the institutional structures not having the scope to or the capability to face the initial crisis. Subsequently, they have addressed many of the critical issues, and this is an experience in a century. So maybe the institutions need to now have some external shocks, some unexpected shocks like this, how to combat. But at the same time, in general, what I can say, institutions are successful when they are effectively linked with policies and the markets. So in literature, we talk about policy market institution interlinkages. So probably somewhere this COVID pandemic had caused some kind of disruptions to these interlinkages, or probably these interlinkages were not explored because nobody had expected. Even a month before the pandemic, nobody had expected that it would be such a huge crisis. But again, this is probably a learning experience. And some structural help in facing some such crisis in a better way. But what I feel is that probably initially they subsequently have been very effective in facing the crisis and resolving the problems. And the second question is basically inclusive and strategies, good markets in the for remote villages. Okay, parent optimality condition can be achieved or possibly until the behavioral sciences are developed. Yes, that is very important. Whatever policies the government decide, whatever institutional supports we have, in fact, to some extent this is related. It is also equally important to understand how people respond and whether the institutions have failed or they have been successful. It also depends to a large extent on the perceptions, depending on my objective function. And that is what I was pointing out, that we have diverse objective functions. And based on our objective functions and how do we respond to different scenarios, accordingly we assess whether the institutions are successful or failures. And behavioral sciences would be very, very important in this context. As regards the institutions in remote areas, yes, market may not be that way developed in many of the remote areas, but say for example the Panchayati Raj institutions, they are very, very efficient. In many cases, we have seen that NGOs are also playing very active role, or other community-based organizations. So there are scopes, there are opportunities, but at the same time, understanding the behavioral part of people at large and how they respond, what they perceive, probably we need to focus more on some such issues for detailed understanding and then designing the strategies accordingly. And that is what I was pointing at the beginning. Probably we need to have more systematic analysis, even to respond to that question that whether institutions have failed or they have been successful. For that also we need to have more systematic analysis in wider perspectives and in larger context. The other question is basically what steps should the government take during this COVID? As I said, I would basically like to focus here on two major aspects. One is facilitating growth of agriculture through development and strengthening of value chains. At the same time, also facilitating growth of larger enterprises and then strengthening the interlinkages between the two. If these two sectors that are in general known as the real sectors of the economy, if they grow at a higher rate, definitely overall growth rate of the economy would be accelerated. And as far as the role of artificial intelligence is concerned, here I basically focused on the decision-making process. Say in respect of resource utilization, we have, as I said, diverse objective functions, diverse stakeholders, diverse perspectives, and hence perceptions, and multi-constraints. Now, depending on which way the resource allocation decision goes, accordingly the perceptions would be set in terms of the implications or effectiveness of the institutions and policies. And then some will say that the institutions have failed, and others would say that the institutions have been successful. Now, artificial intelligence, now we need to analyze a very, very large set of data to have more robust decisions in some such situations. And artificial intelligence techniques would help, I mean, that is my understanding, that artificial intelligence techniques would help to make some such decisions in more robust way. I'll just give one more example, like crop choice decisions by the farmers. Say a particular farmer has a given piece of land, and there are, say, for example, 5 alternative crops that can be cultivated at a particular point of time. So how to allocate the given amount of land across alternative uses? That is also very, very important. And then having necessary information, the data, regarding how different stakeholders are responding to different situations. That will basically help us to understand the behavioral pattern, what Madam was talking about. So data analysis part is definitely important, and we need to focus on analysis of large data set. Second is, yes, behavioral experiments are also important. In fact, at IIT Kharagpur, we are planning to have some such courses, where basically we will try to understand the behavioral perspectives of decision makers. And the other point I would like to make here, basically in case of role of artificial intelligence, one is definitely the decision-making process when we have multiple stakeholders, multiple criteria, multiple objective functions. But at the same time, some such techniques, AI techniques, would be very, very important to make decisions when the responses are perception-based, when we need to make decisions under uncertainties. So basically to have scenario building in more robust way by using AI techniques and making the decisions accordingly. So to I think that there is another question. In which ways the privatization of mandis of agriculture would be helpful? Now, in which way it would be helpful, we need to see the context. Again, context is very important, because if we see it from the perspective of small farmers and if we see it from the perspective of large farmers, maybe the analysis will go into different ways. But what we have experienced in a project, that in many cases, going to the market for the small farmers and selling the product directly to the consumers has huge opportunity cost. Now, whether the scale of farming is sufficient enough to compensate that opportunity cost. And here, strengthening the value chain and supply chain would probably help the farmers in avoiding some such opportunity costs and avoiding also the market related risks. Because for an individual farmer who is a marginal farmer, it's very difficult to know what is going to be the supply situation in the market tomorrow. And so let us take the example that the farmer has harvested the produce. Farmer has taken the produce to the market. And by reaching the market, the farmer could find that there is huge supply and the price has gone down. Then what to do? So, if the process can create strong and wider supply and value chains, this can always give the farmers larger opportunities. But having again robust conclusion in this regard, probably we need to explore larger data set in more robust way. But apparently what we have seen in our study areas, that when the farmer is taking broccoli to the market, to the local market, the farmer is not in a position to sell broccoli in the local market and then there is a loss. But if there was a robust supply chain, the farmer could have got the price. So we need to see from different perspectives, and having a common or general answer would be very difficult. So probably the response would be different when we are talking about large farmers vis-a-vis the small or marginal farmers. But again, as I said, I mean, answer to all these questions, I would say the perception matters a lot. So the behavioral part is also very, very important, and artificial intelligence can also play, application of artificial intelligence would play a very, very significant role in this context. Thank you, that's all from my side.
Thank you, sir. We have got 6 questions after discuss on the topic in the chat box. Our respected sir, Dr. Pulok sir, Dr. Pinaki sir, explained the answer, all the questions very nicely. Hope we all understand. Now, I'm requesting Dr. Mausi Mitro to say something for continuation of the sessions.
Madam, I have to say something.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pinaki sir, Associate Professor, Department of Economics, Vidyasagar University.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Professor Pulok Mishra, Department of Humanities and Social Science, IIT Kharagpur, for your informative information which is enriched the webinar. Many, many thanks to both the resource persons for spending your valuable time for us. Thank you, both the speaker and resource as well as the resource person. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for spending your valuable time with us and share your thoughts. Undoubtedly, our participants will be beneficial from this webinar. I feel again, I want to say that it is my privilege that such eminent economists like you have agreed to talk in this webinar. Thank you very much. Now we are almost at the end of today's webinar. In the valedictory session, we have with us Coordinator of IQAC, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, Dr. Shomit Kumar Maiti. Now I cordially request Dr. Shomit Kumar Maiti to deliver the vote of thanks. It's over to you, Shomit-da. Shomit-da?
Just wait a few seconds.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Shomit Kumar Maiti, Assistant Professor and Head, Department of English, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, and also working as the coordinator of IQAC, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya. I feel honored to get the opportunity to propose a vote of thanks on this state-level webinar on the issues of livelihoods in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, organized by the Department of Economics and IQAC, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya. I take this opportunity to extend my hearty thanks to Dr. Debaprasad Sahu, Principal, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, and Chairperson of this webinar for his tireless effort in organizing such successful events during the COVID-19 pandemic. I convey my hearty thanks to Dr. Binod Chaudhary, Vice Principal, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, and co-chairperson of this webinar. I extend my hearty thanks to the distinguished resource persons of this webinar, Dr. Pinaki Das, Associate Professor, Department of Economics, Vidyasagar University, and Dr. Pulok Misro, Professor of Economics, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, for giving us time and sharing your knowledge with the students and academic community of our college. Our special thanks goes to all the students, teachers, participants, researchers, and delegates from the various colleges and universities who enthusiastically participated in this live program to make this event an enjoyable and memorable one. We must express our deep sense of appreciation and gratitude for the advisors of this webinar and each and every member of the organizing committee of this webinar and technical committee. My sincere thanks to everybody directly or indirectly associated with organizing this grand event. Finally, I must congratulate Dr. Mousumi Mitro for organizing this successful webinar. Thank you everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Maiti, for delivering the vote of thanks. So with this message from our coordinator of IQAC, I announced the program to be ended here. Thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.